Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Dan Miller, Historical Solutions LLC. We're doing top five. We're top fiving this week, March 14th, pre St. Patrick's Day, March 14th, 1775, 250 years ago. Right about now, in 2025, 250 years ago, we're looking on the road to the Declaration of Independence, American founding, the American Revolution. We're in the midst of that latter thing right now. So we're doing the top five things from that week, in my opinion. Good to see you. Real people, real stories, real life from 250 years ago. Let's thank our sponsor, 99% fact, 1% fiction. Our sponsor today, well, it's not really a sponsor so much. Let's just say they collaborated. So these two entities have collaborated for a joint sponsorship of my episode number 19 today. So we have Godolphin and Nimrod, and no, those aren't the two collaborators. Those are two stud horses that you in the Philadelphia area, no, I'm sorry, in the Virginia area, if you want to have your mare bred and sired with a very potentially promising foal, we've got the two studs that are going to do that for you, Godolphin and Nimrod. Now, we have owners of each one that are offering these services at their facility, at their barnyard, if you will, their paddock. Ample pasture is available for your mare, so that's number one. Number two, we're not responsible for accidents that occur before, during, or after the act. And number three, we're also not responsible for anything that's lost or stolen or strays away, as in your mare, while she is in our care. Under the sponsorship of Godolphin and Nimrod, two prized stud horses, stallions that you can take advantage of for your mare in the greater Virginia area. Contact the printers of the Virginia Gazette, Dixon and is it Houston? Dixon and Hunter, I'm sorry. They'll fulfill your contract and interest and needs and things like that. So thank you to our two sponsors today, Godolphin and Nimrod of a sort. 99% fact, 1% fiction. We're at episode number 19. We're top fiving, as I said. Here we go. Number five, coming in at number five, the Treaty of Surat. Surat is a place in what's now India. The treaty is 250 years ago this week. It's between the British East India Company, led by Governor General, who was it here? Warren Hastings. The treaty is made with local tribal confederation or confederacy. That treaty has resulted in an arrangement. The tribe is giving, a confederacy is giving up control of two provinces. It's giving up the revenue that goes along with them to the British East India Company. In exchange for that, what would it be? The BEIC, the British East India Company, is offering military support, military assistance. So it's a treaty that they've signed 250 years ago this week. I bring it up, and I think it's a very appropriate thing. We're talking British Empire. We're talking British colonies. It's just a different part of the world from what we're normally looking at, but I encourage you to keep track of that. I certainly have been in the course of Americanism Redux. This is a very important thing. Serves as an interesting comparison and contrast to what we see in the Atlantic coast, the 13 colonies there in the New World. That's number five. Let's go to number four. Let's get our graphics people going so they won't be upset with me. Number four on our top five list, Daniel Boone, Michael Stoner. 35 Axemen, A-X-M-E-N. Daniel Boone, Michael Stoner, and 35 Axemen. They're leaving Fort Chiswell in the far western reaches of the colony of Virginia. They're leaving today, and they're taking their axes and their muskets and their rifles and their camping equipment, and they're heading out, and they're going to blaze a trail. They're going to whack pieces off of trees as they're going. That's the trail blaze marks that will help establish a new road that they're going to end up calling the Wilderness Road that goes out into the area known as Kentucky. So it's a transportation route. It's a settlement route. It's a, to some extent, from the perspective of the natives who are already there, a land seizure route. But it's today, 250 years ago. Boone, Stoner, 35 axemen begin their whack and whack of all of this line of trees that'll lead you further west from Fort Chiswell, Virginia, to Kentucky. That comes in at number 4. Now, number 3 is essentially going to be, I'm back and forth a little bit, 3 and 2, 2 and 3. I'm going to settle in here now. Now, they're paired together is really what I'm saying. They're paired together. So here comes in number 3, the first of this pair. And that's going to be Samuel Adams. This isn't Sam, but it could be, right? It could be. So Samuel Adams today, 250 years ago, writes a letter to a buddy of his. We don't know the specific name. You know from the material inside the letter, it's a buddy of his in South Carolina, probably the colony of South Carolina, probably the community of Charleston. And in the letter, Sam Adams, who can be a little cynical, a little dour, a little downcast, he is just totally upbeat, totally enthusiastic, totally just so ready for the future because of what's happening in the present. And that is the state of colonial protest, which has turned into resistance, which has turned into some movement to be their own thing, even if it's within the British Empire, to be their own thing here in the New World. And in this letter, and this is why it's number 3, for us in the top 5. In this letter, he talks about or writes about providence, God, the Almighty, whatever word you're using. It's clear what he means. God it seems to be behind what's happening with the Union, this wonderful, happy, incredibly important union, capital U, that has formed out of colonial protest, colonial resistance, and the colonial cause. The Union has this divine, this divine guidance, soul, energy, and purpose. He doesn't say all of that, but it's clear that's exactly what he means, and he's so very grateful for it. So that's our number 3. Now you're going to see why I'm pairing it up with number 2. So number 2 is the Reverend Samuel Hopkinson from the colony of Rhode Island. He's a Quaker, and he's decided it's time to say it. It's time to advocate for it. He puts an op-ed piece into a Pennsylvania newspaper, and it's about enslavement. He said, this is wrong. It's wrong for us to be promoting colonial rights and liberties and freedoms and everything like that while we're denying rights, liberties, and freedoms to enslaved black men, black women, black children. It is wrong. Let's raise this up. Let's do something about it, along with this wonderful cause that we're advocating and seeking and promoting for our own rights, liberties, and freedoms. I bring this in and I emphasize to you, again, this is number 2, the pairing that it's got with 3, with Sam Adams. Because, folks, there's a very difficult reality. Adams would tell you the only reason that we're succeeding right now, we being the colonial resistance movement, the only reason we're succeeding is union, this capital U, right? The 13 colonies up and down the coast. It's never happened before in the New World, really, or anywhere else to this extent. And goodness, this union just seems to have this divine purpose behind it. And yet, as we spread out the colonial cause to the Union, we're encountering things that make it challenging, difficult, contradictory, conflicting, like enslavement. If you keep the cause local, New England, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, for example, even though there's enslavement there, it's downward going, it's declining. There's a movement there to kind of push it down, ever downward and kind of out, it seems, right now, right? Hopkinson is kind of pointing to that as this Rhode Island Quaker preacher. But as you broaden that union out, and by Adams's understanding of it, as you broaden the success of the thing, which the broadening is the success, it's its only hope. Now you're taking in conflict, contradiction, challenges, and all kinds of tensions about things that necessarily don't fit real well together, right? Liberty on the one hand, enslavement on the other. goodness, life's a complicated mess sometimes. That comes in at number 2, and you can see why I paired it up with number 3. We're going to go number 1, and then we're going to get out of your way here. Number 1 in the top 5 for this week of March 14th, 1775 to 2025. Number 1 is what I'm calling the Westminster Chaos. Westminster is a community in the colony of New York, the eastern fringe of the northern part of the colony of New York. We now know this fringe as Vermont. It wasn't that then. It wasn't a colony at that point. There were folks who wanted to be one, but it wasn't the reality yet. So it's in New York, Westminster, and there's a courthouse there, and there's a dispute. And the dispute turns from just yelling to confusion to ultimately, as I've labeled it, chaos and death. There's a series of local land disputes. People are losing their homes to outside speculators. The economy is taking a dive. There's an awful lot of ill will there about the tenuousness, the fragility of land ownership for people who've had their homes for several years. They're losing those homes to folks who are scooping them up, getting a good deal in doing so. So that's caused problems. And so there's protests. That's gotten kind of melded together with the whole colonial rights thing, right? It's not hard to see how it might get melded together. Well, it is melded together, and there's a protest outside this courthouse. A local judge, trying to calm everything down, brings the protesters inside. Let's talk it out. Let's hang out a bit. Try to get some things sorted out with one another. A sheriff and a posse come by, who've been organized because as a counter protest movement. There's, again, confusion, chaos, and everything else, and a clash between the folks that are inside the house and the sheriff and the posse. They drive the protesters out of the house. In doing so, they shoot several protesters, one of whom is hit is 21-year-old William French. The sheriff and the posse drag French, not knowing he's dead at this point. They throw his body, which has been riddled with bullets 5 times. The killing shot is into the forehead. It's the 4th of the 5 shots. They throw his body into the inside the courthouse along with some protesters who they've arrested and are overnight imprisoning. Later, in a few more hours, beyond our week this week, in a few more hours, there's going to be another counter group come together, and it's just a big fat mess. My point in sharing this is that this stuff gets all twisted together, and we're seeing this. We've seen it before in Redux in our stories and entries, but this is the first time we've seen this kind of bloodshed so closely aligned with the protest movement in this kind of chaotic scene. And just want you to understand the importance of the Westminster chaos as kind of pulling that lid off of a lot of boiling tensions and boiling hostilities that have just kind of emerged by the time we get to mid-March in 1775. Boy, it's bubbling over now. It's coming out, it's bubbling over, and people are dying as a result of it. This is the Westminster chaos of 250 years ago this week. I thank you for hanging out with me today. I do want to leave you with one thought. I wrote this in the story for this past week. I'll put it on a link at the bottom of this podcast. It's springtime, or we're knocking on the door, right? We're knocking on the door of springtime here in the middle of March. And there's a feeling for most of us who live where there's changes of seasons. There's a feeling that comes along with that. You know what's ahead. Part of what's ahead is a new life. There's new life in plants and livestock and trees and you name it. There's just a new life that's coming back with the warmth and the heat and the sun and everything else. And so that's you feel that that's ahead. But 250 years ago, there's that feeling. We know that that's happening. George Washington, by the way, is walking through his orchards at Mount Vernon, checking the tree buds of the peach trees, thinking about planting new cherry trees that he's gotten from a neighbor. So this is the time of year for that new energy to kind of be embraced. But 250 years ago, in addition to the tree buds, there's a sense that there is a new energy that's coming. And the new energy is whatever and wherever we're headed with this current crisis between empire and colonies. Now, Westminster shows us a little bit, suggests it to us a little bit, but everybody kind of feels it as part of this new season that's coming on. That's something I think we can all relate to. I wonder, do you feel that today or not? Maybe not. Maybe so, maybe not. That's your call. I'm Dan Miller, Historical Solutions LLC. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me. We're going to be back next week with 250 years ago this week and our top 5. So thanks so much, and I'll talk to you soon.